She hung from a cottonwood tree like a curse, wrist bound high, skin blistered, body swaying in the desert wind. Above her, a sign dripped red: "White man don't forgive." It wasn't a warning, it was a sentence. Then came a man, dust-covered, tired, not a hero. Just a rancher with ghosts of his own. But he stopped. He cut her down. "They left you to die in the wind," he said, "but I ain't the wind." And when she stirred, she didn't ask why he saved her. She only said, "You're either brave or foolish." That moment sparked something neither of them expected: a reckoning with her past, his guilt, and a West that had long forgotten what mercy meant. The New Mexico sun scorched everything it touched. Wind dragged dust in slow spirals across the dry canyon floor as Thorne Ellis rode alone, his boots hanging heavy from the stirrups, his eyes squinting against the light. He wasn't a man of many words or many needs, just a rancher chasing after a stray steer he'd lost 3 days ago, until the trail led him somewhere he hadn't meant to find. He felt it before he saw it: a wrongness in the air, stillness too deep, wind holding its breath. He dismounted, tying his mare to a dead branch, and slung his rifle across his back. His boots crunched over dry grass and scattered stones. A faint sound cut through the silence, something between a whisper and a cry. That's when he saw her. She was hanging. Her wrists were tied high above her head to a low cottonwood branch, her arms stretched until her shoulders seemed pulled from their sockets. Her toes barely touched the dirt. A young Apache girl, barely more than a shadow, skin cracked from sun and wind, hair tangled and caked with blood and dust. Her chest still moved, shallow and uneven, but she was alive. Above her head, nailed to the bark in cruel strokes of dried red paint, was a wooden board. On it, 5 jagged words: "White man don't forgive." Thorne stopped cold. The sight punched the breath from his chest. The message wasn't just for her, it was for him, for every man like him. It wasn't just punishment, it was spectacle, a sentence carved into the desert like a scar. He stepped closer. The girl's face was swollen, her lips split, her brow bruised. Dried blood crusted her cheek. The rope had cut deep into her wrists. She was barely holding on. Thorne's hand went to his belt. His fingers trembled slightly as he drew his knife. The edge of the blade glinted under the sunlight. For a moment he hesitated, because that sign, it screamed at him. It made him guilty of things he'd never done, and yet had never stopped. But the girl let out a weak, guttural moan. That sound undid him. He stepped forward, took hold of the rope, and whispered, "I ain't that." The knife slid clean through. She collapsed. He caught her before her knees hit the earth. Her body was light, far too light. Her skin burned with fever. Her breath rasped against his collarbone. Her eyes flickered open just once, dark, haunted, searching, and then shut again. No words, no name. He held her for a long moment, standing in the hush beneath the cottonwood tree. Then he turned, walked back to his mare, and lifted her onto the saddle in front of him. She didn't stir. The ride home was long and silent. His cabin stood lonely at the edge of the desert, a one-room shelter of timber and tin. When he pushed open the door, the place felt different, less empty, less cold. He laid her on his cot gently, pulled the blanket over her trembling form, removed his coat and draped it across her chest. She looked small there, a wounded creature dropped into a space meant only for ghosts. Thorne knelt beside her, poured water into a basin, wiped the blood from her brow. "You're safe now," he said, mostly to himself. But neither of them believed it. Not yet. And outside, nailed to a tree the wind wouldn't forget, that sign still hung, bleeding into the sky. The cabin had been quiet for so long it had forgotten how to hold warmth. But Sana didn't speak loudly. She just existed, and somehow that was enough to wake the walls. The girl, he still didn't know her name, lay curled beneath his old quilt, her face pale except for the bruises that stained it like war paint. She hadn't spoken since he cut her down. Not a word, not even a sound, save for the shallow rasp of her breathing. Thorne didn't push. He couldn't. Whatever she'd endured out there didn't come off with water and a warm bed. It clung to her like shadow. Each morning he'd bring her water, beans, and bread, placing them on the wooden crate beside the cot. She would sit up slowly, accept the food, and nod once. Nothing more. Her eyes followed him, though. She watched when he chopped wood outside, when he fed the mare, when he read old books by the fire. Her gaze wasn't afraid. It was measuring, as if she was still deciding whether he was a man or a storm waiting to strike. Sometimes he spoke aloud just to break the silence, even if it was only about weather or chores or which coyote howled louder last night. She never answered, but the silence between them changed. Less like a wound, more like a waiting room. Then came the knock. It was a hard, precise knock, the kind that didn't ask permission. Thorne opened the door slowly, his rifle just out of sight behind it. A cavalry officer stood on the porch, young, sharp-jawed, dust on his boots but none on his uniform. Behind him, two soldiers sat on restless horses. The officer tipped his hat. "Name's Lieutenant Harlan Brigg, Dust Hollow Station," he said. "We're tracking a fugitive, Apache girl, escaped custody near Cottonwood Flats. You seen anything unusual?" Thorne didn't blink. "No Apache come through here, just jackrabbits and ghosts. Suckin'." Brigg pulled a folded sketch from his coat. It was crude, but the lines were close enough. Long hair, sharp eyes, fierce mouth. "Sana." He didn't flinch. "She's wanted for murder," the officer said. "Dangerous. Might be hurt. Might be hiding." "Lot of dangerous things out here," Thorne said evenly. "Rattlesnakes, dust storms, men with paper and assumptions." Brigg frowned. "We're not here to argue." "Then don't." A long pause stretched between them. One of the horses stomped. Brigg's gaze slid toward the windows, narrowed. "If you see anything," he said slowly, "you let us know. There's a reward. $50. Thorne gave a nod that wasn't a nod. "Sure." He didn't move until the soldiers were specks against the horizon. Inside, Sana stood behind the curtain, her back pressed to the wall. She had heard every word. Thorne didn't explain. He just took off his coat and hung it by the fire. "I told them no one's here," he said quietly. She didn't speak, but her eyes changed, sharper, softer. Suspicion warred with something older, something like hope. "I don't know what you did," he added, "or what they think you did. But out here, a man makes choices. I made mine." She looked at him for a long time, then sat back down, hands wrapped around the cup he'd left earlier. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't cold. This time it listened. The wind shifted that morning. It wasn't louder, just different, less cruel, more curious, like it had paused to watch. The sun hung low, not yet punishing, and a soft warmth pressed against the earth like a hand over a scar. Thorne sat on the porch sharpening his knife, slow and methodical. He wasn't thinking of much, just letting the steel slide against stone, over and over. Behind him, the cabin door creaked open. He didn't turn. He didn't have to. Barefoot steps crossed the wood, then the earth. He looked up as Sana walked toward the edge of the yard, the farthest she'd ventured since he'd brought her home. She wore one of his old coats, sleeves rolled to her elbows. Her walk was steady but cautious, like she was testing whether the ground would still accept her weight. She stopped at a bare patch of dirt near the barn, where the wind had swept the earth clean. Then she knelt. Thorne rose without a word and followed at a respectful distance. He stood a few feet behind her, silent. In her hand she held a stick. With slow, careful movements, she began to draw. Lines curled outward, then lifted. Wings, a body, fire. The image took shape, a bird mid-flight, its feathers engulfed in flame. The detail was raw, almost violent. The beak open in silent cry, flames licking skyward like a crown. Thorne felt something tighten in his chest. He'd seen symbols carved into rifles, markings in war camps. But this was different. "What is it?" he asked softly. Sana didn't look up. She tapped the bird's chest with the stick. "This was my father's," she said. Her voice was dry but steady, like a riverbed speaking after too long without rain. "Our families, a sign of strength, of survival, always flying, always fire." She paused, breathing unevenly. "Last spring," she continued, "the soldiers came, said we had to move. Far away, dry land, no food, They said we were dangerous. She clenched the stick. We said no. We stayed. We fought. Her voice thinned. They burned everything. Killed my mother, my two brothers. Shot the old ones while they prayed. Tied my father to the council pole. Left him hanging. She turned then, locking eyes with Thorn for the first time. I ran, I hid. They found me, said I stole a rifle. I didn't. They beat me anyway. Then they hung me like bait. Thorn couldn't speak. The words sat heavy in the air, heavier than dust or sun. She looked back to the drawing. Her shoulders shook, but no tears came. Thorn crouched beside her. I believe you, he said. She didn't answer. After a long moment, she dropped the stick and folded her hands in her lap. The silence returned, but it wasn't empty. It was sacred. Then Thorn whispered, I had a sister. Sana looked up. 16. Her name was Mary. His jaw tightened. Last spring, while I was out hunting, a raid hit the ranch. Apache, they said. Maybe, maybe not. The barn caught fire. I heard her screaming. He swallowed hard. I didn't go in. I was scared. I waited. By the time help came, it was too late. The wind passed between them, gentle. They sat side by side, the flaming bird etched in dirt between them. Her grief, his guilt, wounds with different names but the same silence. Then Sana reached out, not for him, but for the earth. She pressed her hand into the soil, just beside the bird's wing, fingers spread, palm flat. Thorn did the same. No words, no forgiveness. Just two people, kneeling in dust, writing truth in symbols too old to burn. The fire crackled low in the hearth, casting soft shadows along the cabin walls. It had been a long day. The wind had died down. The desert held its breath again. Thorn Ellis stirred a pot of beans in the corner, more out of habit than hunger. Behind him, Sana stood near the window, her arms folded across her chest, gaze lost somewhere beyond the dark. He didn't expect her voice to break the silence, but it did. Why did you cut me down? He froze. The spoon stopped mid-stir. Her voice was calm, but it was the kind of calm that carried a blade underneath. Thorn turned slowly. Because you were alive. That's not why. She faced him now, eyes steady, shadowed by the flicker of firelight. If I'd been white, would you still have used the knife? The question hit harder than anything the cavalry had asked, and it deserved more than a deflection. Thorn walked over to the table and sat. He didn't look away. I don't love skin, he said at last. I love what breathes under it. Sana didn't speak, but something flickered in her gaze. Surprise, maybe. Maybe sadness. He leaned forward, elbows resting on worn wood. I was raised to think in lines, skin, borders, names. But I've seen too many graves dug in straight rows, and none of them cared what color lay beneath. She stepped closer, not trusting yet, but less afraid of the floor between them. They carved that sign into me, she whispered. White man don't forgive. Then they lied, he replied. She studied him, lips parted slightly, breath shallow. Her voice dropped. You said you made a choice. I did. And you'd make it again? He stood, slowly, carefully. The space between them vanished like smoke. Every time. A long silence stretched, tense and alive. Her eyes searched his face, looking for cracks, lies, hesitation. But he gave her none. She reached up gently and placed a hand on his chest, right over his heartbeat. It thudded solid beneath her palm. He touched her jaw, lightly, reverently, like she might vanish under pressure. His hand was calloused but warm. Then, like breath returning after too long underwater, they leaned in. The kiss was soft, brief, not desperate, not burning, but steady. Real. Two people carrying too much, finally setting a corner of it down. When they pulled apart, Sana didn't let go. They took everything from me, she said. Then let's build something they can't touch. Outside, the stars blinked into the sky. Inside, two hands remained joined over the ashes of old pain, choosing something new, something scarred and honest and still worth holding. The desert morning had risen quietly, as if afraid to disturb what had finally settled. By mid-afternoon, the sun beat heavy across the land, but Sana was already outside, barefoot in the clearing, braid down her back, wrapped in Thorn's old coat. Her steps were slower now, not from weakness, but from thought. Thorn watched from the porch, knife idle in his hand. He didn't speak. There was something sacred in the stillness. She knelt where the earth was bare, where wind had cleared the dust, and picked up a stick again. But this time she didn't draw the same symbol. She redrew it, deliberately. A firebird like before, but with changes. The wings stretched higher now, the flames shaped like hands rising, not consuming. At the heart of the bird, she carved a spiral, not destruction, becoming. Thorn stepped closer, but didn't interrupt. Sana spoke, barely above the breeze. I used to draw it as memory, she said. Today I draw it as promise. She tapped the spiral at the bird's heart. This is for her, my mother, for my father, for those who burned, and for the one inside me now. Thorn's eyes flickered to her belly, then back to the drawing. Asha doesn't just mean fire, she added. It means breath, too. Life that rises through ash. She looked up at him. We don't have to erase the past. Just stop letting it bury the future. He nodded, knelt beside her, and placed his hand beside the spiral. Flat, open, steady. They didn't speak again. But in the center of the desert, beneath a sky that no longer pressed down, they carved not just survival, but a beginning. They wrote at dusk, silent and fast, shadows bleeding into the low ridges of the desert. No goodbye, no fire left in the hearth, just the creak of saddle leather and the wind pressing at their backs. Thorn Ellis rode ahead, posture stiff, rifle strapped across his shoulder. Sana followed close behind, her hands steady on the reins, her braid whipping behind her like a banner. They didn't speak. There wasn't time for words. Behind them, smoke curled above the hills. Someone had found the cabin. Someone knew they were running, 10 miles south. That's all they needed. 10 miles to reach the borderlands. Wild country, no cavalry, no townfolk with torches. Word was, some Apache still lived free out there, far from law, far from signs that bled. The moon crested over the rock spines, painting the earth silver. It was almost beautiful. And then the shot rang out. A crack echoed through the canyon like a bone breaking in God's hand. Thorn gasped. His body jolted sideways, then fell hard from the saddle. His shoulder hit the dirt first, blood blooming across his shirt like wildfire. Thorn! Sana screamed, wrenching her horse to a stop. She leapt down, knees skidding across the sand as another bullet split the air, kicking dust near her feet. From the ridge above, two riders emerged, dark shapes against the stars, rifles raised, coats flapping like vultures. Thorn tried to rise, failed. Keep going, he rasped. Ride, leave me. No, she hissed. Another shot tore past them, striking stone. She crouched low, hooking her arm under his. We moved together. With everything she had, she dragged him to his feet. He groaned, blood soaking her hands. But he walked, one step at a time, stumbling toward the rock wall ahead, a narrow gap in the cliffs barely visible in the moonlight. The gunman reloaded, but the pass was tight, jagged. Horses couldn't follow. They disappeared between the stones just as another shot struck sparks behind them. Inside the pass, the world changed. Shadows thickened. The air cooled. Silence returned. Thorn collapsed to his knees, wheezing. You got grit, girl. Sana tore off her coat, pressing it against his wound. You're losing too much blood, she said. He chuckled faintly, then winced. Just give me a minute. She held the coat tight, hands trembling. I can't lose you, she whispered. Not after everything. He looked up at her, dust in his eyes, blood at his lips. Tell me something true, he said. Anything. I don't care if it hurts. She swallowed, then reached for his hand, brought it to her chest, just over her heart. My name, she said, is Sanatali. It means peaceful morning, in the tongue of my mother's people. Thorn stared at her like she had just given him a map out of a burning house. He whispered it back. Sana. Tali. She nodded, her voice low. You saved me when I was nothing but silence and dust. Now it's my turn. He smiled, faint but real. And for a moment, under the stars and stone, Pain gave way to something softer. They didn't speak again for hours. Just the sound of breath, of survival, of two broken people choosing to keep moving together. The river sang softly beneath the morning sky, weaving through tall grass and stones like it had nowhere else to be. Nestled at its bend stood a small lodge, wood, clay, and patience holding it together. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Smoke curled gently from the chimney, the scent of cedar and stew warming the air. Birds fluttered through the cottonwoods. Somewhere in the trees, wind chimes made from old bones clicked like distant laughter. Inside, the home was simple. Bundles of herbs drying in corners, a few hand-carved chairs, a quilt draped over the cradle by the hearth. The cradle was empty, for now, but not for long. Sana Tali moved slowly through the doorway, one hand cradling her rounded belly, the other resting on the frame. Her face glowed with the quiet strength of women who had survived more than they spoke of. Her bare feet kissed the earth as she stepped outside, wrapped in a shawl of soft wool, her braid brushing the center of her back. She had not spoken much of the pain behind her. Neither had Thorn, but here in this patch of earth beyond judgment and flame, neither needed to. Out in the field, Thorn trained a young horse, his movements careful, deliberate. The wound in his shoulder ached in the mornings, but it hadn't slowed him. If anything, it reminded him of what mattered. Every so often, he looked up toward the lodge, toward her, and always he smiled. That evening, Sana walked to the edge of the river. She knelt, dipped her hands into the cool water, and whispered, "You'll be born where peace flows, little one." Thorn joined her, standing tall and quiet. She reached for his hand. He took it, and they stood together in the golden hush of dusk, watching the river carry away everything that no longer needed to stay. It wasn't the life either of them had planned, but it was the one they'd fought to create, and in the silence between them, where once there had been fear and fire, there was only breath and belonging, and something that felt like the very start of the world. Night had fallen quiet. The stars blinked gently above the river, their reflections drifting across the surface like scattered memories. Crickets hummed in the distance, and a soft wind rustled the reeds. The fire behind the lodge had died down to glowing embers, its warmth lingering like an old promise. Sana Tali sat on a blanket near the water's edge, the swell of her belly rising gently beneath her shawl. Her hands rested there, cradling the future. She spoke low, almost in a hush, as though the river might carry her words to the child still nestled inside her. "Little one," she whispered, "you won't know the sound of gunfire. You won't grow up with fear in your throat. You'll know the sound of the river, the warmth of fire, not the kind that destroys, but the kind that makes stew and stories and sleep." She paused, brushing a thumb over the curve of her stomach. "The world will try to name you before it knows you. Apache, half-blood, outlaw's child. But you'll carry something stronger than any name they give. You'll carry the choice we made, to love in a place that said we shouldn't." Footsteps approached behind her. She didn't turn. She didn't have to. Thorn Ellis settled beside her, shoulder brushing hers, the smell of wood smoke still on his shirt. He said nothing, just looked out across the water. The river moved slow and sure, like it had all the time in the world. After a long silence, Sana turned to him. "Do you ever think about the sign?" He nodded slowly. "Sometimes." "White man don't forgive," she said softly. "But you did." He looked at her, eyes shadowed but full of light. "No, I just remembered how." She smiled, then leaned her head against his shoulder. The wind curled around them like a quiet blessing. And in that moment, beneath the stars, beside the water, they sat as more than what the world had tried to make them. Not Apache or rancher, not fugitive or soldier, just two souls who had chosen each other in the ashes and built something new in the flame, and the river kept flowing, peaceful, like her name, like home. In a world divided by borders, skin, and silence, Thorn and Sana chose something rare, to see the soul beneath the scars. Their story may have happened long ago, but its truth still echoes today. How many signs are still hanging in our world, written not in blood, but in assumptions? How many people are judged before they're heard, abandoned before they're known? This tale reminds us that forgiveness isn't weakness, it's freedom. That love, when it dares to cross lines drawn by fear, can become the strongest force in the desert of division. And maybe the greatest lesson of all? That healing often begins not with words, but with someone choosing to stay. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If this story moved you, please give it a like, share it with someone who still believes in second chances, and subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more emotional journeys that bridge the past and the present. Thank you for spending your time with us. May your heart stay soft, your faith stay strong, and may you always remember, the river still flows even after fire.